Welcome, folks. Thank you for joining us, giving folks just a minute to connect to audio and get settled. Appreciate you being here. It's great to see you all. All right, looks like we have most folks connected here. Super thrilled to see you. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. If anyone would like Spanish interpretation, it's available throughout our session today. You're going to go to the Zoom menu and look for the globe icon and click on it to change the language. So I'm going to kick us off. I'm Xiomara, and I'd love to introduce myself. We do our introductions at Promise 54 a little bit differently than some of us may have been taught to do introductions. We basically try to center radical humanity, whatever really truly makes us who we are and makes us tick in our introductions. And so my radically human introduction goes like this. Again, my name is Xiomara, and my pronouns are she and her. I identify in lots of ways, including as a cisgender, able-bodied, Latina, queer woman, a daughter, a little sister, a wife, a titi, a mother, and an aspiring warrior for racial justice. My Roman Catholic, Puerto Rican mother grew up low income in the South Bronx and met my Muslim first-generation immigrant dad from Bombay, India in college. They fell madly in love. And together they became the first in their families on both sides to graduate from college. They went on to get their PhDs, and together through education and supporting one another, they broke the intergenerational cycle of poverty for our family. Their experiences informed my passion around educational equity, which is where I've spent the vast majority of my career. I also grew up watching my parents form connection across lots of lines of difference, from spices and food to rhythms and music and language and religion and so much more. And for them, that was a big part of their definition of love. And today, it informs a lot of my approach to building radically human spaces where people can bring as much of themselves as they're willing to generously share, and in so doing, find connection and safety across lines of difference and ultimately be positioned to thrive. I'm also a wife to an amazing woman who I have been with for 21 years. We have been illegally married for 9 years. We have been legally married for 4 years. And I'm a mother to a kind, brave, smart 9-year-old fourth grader. And we approach every day as parents attempting to equip this kiddo to navigate a racist society as both a responsible, white-presenting human and a proud, grounded, confident, multi-ethnic adult one day. So that's a little bit about me personally. I'm also the proud founder and CEO of Promise 54. For anyone just meeting Promise 54 today, we're a national nonprofit organization, and we partner with lots of different orgs across the country working to advance social justice missions to help them to create internal environments where your adults can truly thrive. We do that in a bunch of different ways. We do tailored partnerships, supporting folks to move the work forward from wherever they are. We bring organizations together in cohorts of collective learning, and we do national research, including the research that we're going to anchor in today. We're here today to talk a little bit more about some of the findings from our Unrealized Impact 2.0 report. It's the second in a series. We released the first report in 2017. And it was based on data from 5,000 individuals and 200 organizations back then. And what we wanted to understand is, how is the education sector doing on DEI? And the results were really sobering, showed we had so far to go. So we continued to collect the data and analyze it and mine for insights over time, and work to try to get those back out into the hands of leaders. And we just released our 2.0 report 1 month ago. It now includes data from 28,000 individuals across 500 organizations. It's the largest study of its kind on DEI in the field of education. And I believe it represents a really bold call to action for organizations to engage in the work of becoming diverse, inclusive, equitable, and anti-racist, which we believe is a fundamental precondition for social justice. So let's get into our topic for today. Today, we're going to talk about what transformational change looks like. I'll tell you, in my role, I'm asked multiple times a week for advice on which structures or systems to set up to best enable DEI and anti-racism work within organizations. Should we hire a chief diversity officer? Should we set up a DEI advisory committee? Should we implement policy X or policy Y? How much money should we put aside for this work? Our research in this Unrealized Impact project supported our most typical response, which is it really depends. There's not a single structure or approach which alone correlated with stronger DEI outcomes. So as you can see on this chart that you're seeing, that includes senior diversity officers. It includes DEI advisory teams. The instinct that lots of leaders have to pull discrete technical levers in an effort to affect meaningful organizational change is really common, but technical levers are just not enough to fundamentally transform organizations into diverse, inclusive, equitable, and anti-racist workplaces. The question is not whether to implement this technical solution or that technical solution, it's actually how you implement any of them. So if you are considering hiring a chief diversity officer, then you got to dive in and consider what would that person actually do? What's the context that they're coming into? What kind of decision-making authority will they have? What kind of additional support and cultural buy-in will they have around them? And that sort of deep, intentional approach will help us individually as leaders and collectively as a sector to move beyond structural supports and instead into transformation. And the incredible group of amazing Bahara Fellows joining us today are leading toward real transformation in their spheres. I'm super, super honored that this group of humans has agreed to come join us, share their experiences and their perspectives with us. I'm going to do a quick intro and then kick it on over to them. So Alex Bernadotte is the founder and CEO of Beyond 12, an org focused on supporting college completion by acting as the data and service bridge between K-12 and higher ed. Shruti Sarah is the managing partner at New Profit, where she leads the organization's work in education. Annalisa Quiros Wolf is the founder of Boss Mamas. She's on a mission to support people of color and women to be leaders in their organizations without sacrificing family or self-care. Due to Flying Earth is the executive director of the Native American Community Academy Inspired Schools Network. It's a network that assists communities in implementing structures of Indigenous education. Becky Crow has been the CEO at Clayton Early Learning. It's a Denver-based organization focused on innovating the whole child, whole family approach to the prenatal to 5 years. And a special note of appreciation, in 2017, Becky co-authored the first Unrealized Impact Report, and she served on our advisory panel for this 2.0 version 2. We're super appreciative. And finally, I'm super thrilled to introduce Tracy Dove, who's the Senior Vice President at the Bahar Institute, where she leads the selection team. Tracy's spent over 20 years identifying and assessing and connecting bold and creative leaders to senior level opportunities in the nonprofit sector. And Tracy's joining us to moderate our conversation today. So Tracy, over to you, and perhaps you all could start by introducing yourselves in whatever way feels radically human to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, CEO, and hello, everybody. I am so excited, first of all, about the opportunity to just introduce ourselves in a radically human way and be seen for who we are in the fullness of all that we are beyond just what's on our resume. So I'm going to kick that piece off, and then I will call on each of you to do the same, if that sounds okay. So I am the daughter of 2 adult children and in the messy business of figuring out just what that means in this season of motherhood, air quotes around messy. I am a daughter of a mother who I am blessed to have live with me, as well as just generations of ancestors who continue to live within me. I am a person of strong faith, and I'm really driven by love for people and a desire to see people just walk in their God-given liberty and wholeness in absolutely every aspect of their lives. And I'm a leader, work that just inspires me and challenges me every day. And I'm working hard to be the kind of ancestor, curate a life that will actually impact generations to come. So tell me, Shruti, who are you?
Thank you so much for sharing, Tracy. I am an Indian American. Politically consider myself to be Asian American and a woman of color. I'm a first-generation immigrant. We moved to this country at the age of 1, so technically I think that puts me at generation 1.5. But it's due to a set of parents who were really courageous, didn't know what they would be coming to, didn't have a sense for the conditions that they'd face once they got here, and honestly made an extraordinary bold move to move all the way across the world, in search of opportunity, in search of something that would allow them to advance themselves and their families for generations to come. I'm also a daughter of parents that I have the fortune of getting to know as an adult, in a very different kind of way than growing up with them as a kid. And I'm an aunt. I'm a bua. Bua is, there's many words for aunt in my culture. So I'm a bua to my brother's two daughters, who are both teenagers. And that's a whole experience of engaging with young girls who are going through those years. I'm a masi to many of my cousins' kids. And I'm an auntie to pretty much anyone who is 2 steps removed from me, who comes through Cambridge for their educational experience. I'm somebody who likes cooking and has become an Indian housewife during the pandemic, in that I cook 3 meals for myself every day, or with my family. And I too, like Tracy, am passionate about what I do every day. I'm a meditator, and I enjoy working to advance the evolution of humanity, and that's what I see my work as.
Thank you, Shruti. Duta.
Morning, everyone, or good afternoon for East Coasters. My name is Paul Duta Flangers. Makokia Tiwahe Macha Yawaslaha Mataha Wana Ash Albuquerque wa Chile wo ashi Owawa Kile Echamukte. I'm the son and the grandson of 2 fierce indigenous women who raised me on the reservation in Standing Rock on the South Dakota side. The first generation of my family since my great-grandparents to speak my language and be immersed in my ceremonies. I'm the ancestor of one of the leaders of the Dakota uprising that led to the exile, and one of the reasons that my family located in Standing Rock. I'm the son of a mother who participated in resistance to pipelines as a water protector, and the grandson of a recipient of the MacArthur Genius Award who started 17 tribal colleges around the country. I'm also the ancestor of colonizers on my grandfather's side, who grappled with that in my schooling from elementary to mid school to high school. Somebody that believes in transformation adamantly, believes in local genius, and believes in the power of our young people. It's good to be here this afternoon.
Thank you, Duta. Alex.
Thank you so much, everyone. Such an honor to be here with all of you. So I guess I start my introduction by saying it wasn't a foregone conclusion that I would be sitting here in front of you today, doing what I'm doing as a social entrepreneur and as a CEO. I am an immigrant. I was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, to parents who escaped the Duvalier regime to come to the US in search of better opportunities and a better life for themselves and for me, their firstborn. They left me at the age of 3 months old in the care of my beloved late grandmother, Mommy Claire, who raised me to be a warrior, to be grateful for the sacrifices that my parents and my family were making for me, and who instilled in me a sense of responsibility to pay those sacrifices forward by living a life that allowed not just me to thrive, but that uplifted our community and allowed all of us to thrive. I was raised in inner city Boston by my late grandmother and by my parents English is my third language. I financed my education through federal programs like the Pell Grant and Work Study. And I am the first person in my family to graduate from college. Today, I am a mom to the love of my life, 10-year-old son. I am a wife to an amazing partner. We've been married for 20 years. I am a daughter. I am a sister. I am a niece. I am an aunt, an auntie, a godmother to many, 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 many beautiful, wonderful children. I am a cousin. Although I am no longer a granddaughter, my last living grandparent, my mommy Claire, who raised me, passed away last year as a result of COVID. Her legacy lives through me, and the legacy of the strong women who came before her lived through me. And so today, I am trying my best to be both a grateful descendant and a worthy ancestor. I believe in the power of youth, and I believe that my job is to take a step back, empower them, and just watch them lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Annalisa.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much. I describe myself as a person who is proud of being Filipina American and deeply believes in consciousness, to be a conscious leader and a conscious mother, and also deeply believes in joy. And the way these connect for me is when I think back to the stories that I tell myself, I think about whether or not those are empowering or whether those are disempowering. And for my story that I've lived with for many years as a daughter to parents who immigrated with nothing from the Philippines to America for the American dream, and going to pretty terrible schools and getting beaten up and my parents wanting better for us, and going through the systems, working hard to provide good schools for kids like me and for kids of color, and the beliefs of myself of not being worthy and working hard to prove that I was worthy, sacrificing and seeing a lot of the people around me who were starting to get really tired, but sustaining. And so with that question I had of myself, of this worthiness, that I could shift these beliefs and these stories and believe that I am worthy. And when I have this worthiness, that I could start to shift from not proving myself to believing in myself and see that others are of value and to believe in them too. And that the more that I could pour into myself and believe in myself, that I could pour into others. And that transformation has helped me be a better leader, a better mom, be in collaboration and creativity, be conscious, be present, and be joyful. So I take a stand for that in this movement.
Thank you, Annalisa. And Becky.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm Becky Crow, and it's such an honor to be here today. I was thinking about my purpose or my purpose work, and I think my purpose work is connecting people and ideas across identities to maximize human potential and create the kinds of spaces where we can all thrive. And that purpose work is really my radical introduction, I think, because it has shown up for me at every stage in the game, as an athlete, realizing what is possible in our own bodies and when we come together as teams, fighting through my work for the beloved community, and finding that the spaces that bring me the most joy are those where people are showing up as their whole selves and engaged in that same kind of connection. I learned to believe in and fight for the beloved community before I had the language for that from my mom, who was a lawyer in Memphis, where I was born in the early 70s, taking cases for the ACLU as one of the few female lawyers in town, and my dad, who was in healing profession. And they both made sure that as a white girl growing up in Arizona, that I had multiple perspectives and always access to multiple experiences and perspectives. Spent a lot of time crossing and questioning borders, both literal and figurative, in Mexico and in some of the tribal nations near my home growing up. And this helped me to understand that my work would be working to bridge across perspectives with empathy, questioning my own perspectives, and seeing what's possible in the world when we're able to truly cross those boundaries. I am an avid learner on my own journey of transformation, and I feel blessed to be surrounded by extraordinary women around the country and the world who are co-travelers on this journey. And they serve both as my support and support sisters and accountability partners to continue that work. And most importantly, I'm a mom to the almost next week 16-year-old Mason, and seeing him grow into a self-aware and compassionate human is the greatest gift that I've ever been given. Super honored to be here and excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Becky. And thank you to each of you for just introducing yourselves in a way that just allows us to get a picture of just who you are. And so thank you for that. What does transformation mean to you? And Alex, I would love to start with you, if you wouldn't mind. What does transformation mean to you, just in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in racial justice? What does it mean for you generally, personally, or in your organization?
It's such a big question. I spent quite some time trying to figure out exactly how to place transformation in all of the places in which I work. And so I've decided that I'm going to start with the professional transformation first, right? And so I work in higher education. I work in education, like many of you here. And I believe that in education, we're fond of saying that we are working with a broken system. So we have to fix this broken system. And after many years of being in this space and doing this work, one of the big realizations for me and aha moments, and I think a lot of us have come to this realization, is that we're not operating with a broken system. None of these systems are broken. Systems achieve the outcomes that they are designed to achieve. So these systems were designed to be racist, inequitable, unjust, to deliver the outcomes that we're getting. And for higher education, it's, what we're seeing is the impact of a system that is functioning as it has been designed to open the path of opportunity for a select few and close it for many others. And for me, then, in that space, transformation is about breaking down and rebuilding. We can't continue to make these incremental changes and expect different outcomes. We can't continue to tinker. One of my favorite books is Tinkering Toward Utopia, which is what it feels like we've been doing. So we have to dramatically redesign and transform. And for me, that means centering the voices of the people who were excluded when this committee of 10 in 1896 decided to design this system, right? It was meant to be a launching pad for white men, quite frankly, to launch them into society. So what transformation for me looks like in this space is, can we center the voices of Black and Brown students? Can we center the voices of students who were excluded, but who were feeling the impact today? And until we do that, we create new architects, new designers. We're going to continue to see the impact of that system. So transformation means centering the voices of those who were excluded and bringing them at the table of power, not as consultants and folks to be surveyed, but as co-creators and co-designers into a system that will be more just, more equitable, more accessible, more affordable, more relevant, and that will prepare and launch all of our young people to lead choice-filled lives.
Thank you, Alex. Annalise, I'm wondering, what does transformation look like to you?
I'm building off Alex. So we have this idea that life, this freedom to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And this American dream. And I believed for so long about this that applied to me. And transformation, unfortunately, it's not possible in the way Al's described. It's not set up to allow people of color, people who are not white male, to really thrive. And so if we want transformation, we have to reevaluate how our systems are built. Does that mean we completely dismantle and start from scratch, like a whole new Lego system? Are there places that we can keep? I'm not sure, but I think it has to start with power. Like, where decision-making power, where are the people who we want to serve? Are they at the table? Do they have decision-making power? And will the people who currently have power give space and allow those voices, those decisions to be made? So that's what transformation means to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Annalisa. And Duta, I'm wondering for you, what does the end state of transformation look like?
Yeah. To me, I think that I like Alex, what you framed in terms of the grounding or the centering, because to me it's so old it feels new, and it's about grounding in who we are, where we come from, and that our people across the world have had systems of proliferating knowledge, understanding, stories since time immemorial, and that has been our education. Schools, as they're constructed now, have been relatively new. And so how we conceptualize transformation within what we're doing on a daily basis in education systems, and for me, comes back to the knowledge that we have within our DNA that was passed down through stories, songs, dances, understanding, with the challenge to contextualize them in the here and now. And I think that when we center the knowledge that has been disrupted by colonization and even attached to words like uncivilized or savagery, when we disrupt that type of understanding to then lift it into a mode of genius, something special happens with young people. And I feel like that's where I'm getting the most energy within how I'm thinking about transformation. Also where I'm seeing a lot of energy in terms of where our families and young people are.
Thank you, Duta. Alex, you mentioned this tinkering around the edges that happens with change. I'm just curious, and Becky, I'm going to pose this question to you, what you're seeing as the difference between just technical shifts and real transformational shifts on DEI and racial justice.
Yeah, I think that, people want a playbook, and people want a series of steps that are understandable and knowable, and that you can check it off. And this is just not the nature of the work, obviously, of this work. It's not the nature of transformation work. And so I do think there are, and I've been really grappling with, are the technical a precursor to the transformation? Where does it get stuck in the technical and not move beyond that? Can you skip over the technical and, actually have those transformative experiences? And, I think that you can see in, organizations taking the surveys, there's a way to look at that data and, have a very data-oriented conversation that is not actually tapping into the things that were just described about fundamentally redefining power, fundamentally seeing the dignity in each of us and thinking about what does the work need to do to actually connect at that relational level. And I've been thinking a lot lately also about the intersection of trauma and our work in diversity, equity, and inclusion and racial equity specifically. And I think that, when I think about, we're doing a lot of work to understand, a quick context is I lead an organization that was started 110 years ago as an orphanage for white boys. And over the course of the last century, we now serve 100% kids of color. And I look in our organization and literally in the walls of our organization where there is unhealed trauma. And I believe that that moving beyond the technical means actually working with that trauma in ways that are not just sort of moving through a series of steps, but actually healing the deep, deep trauma that has been accumulated in our bodies, in the walls of our organizations, and in our interpersonal interactions with each other over really centuries at this point.
And Becky, are you seeing where this is being done really well? And if so, what does that look like?
I mean, I think part of it is that relational piece. And I realize it's hard, again, it's hard to describe, but I think it's doing some of these things that even how we started today. It's starting with radically human introductions, realizing that we can connect on a lot of levels beyond our titles or, our resumes, et cetera. But I also think it's a matter of people having the space to feel whole within their organizations, within their families, et cetera. And I had a conversation with a friend and colleague the other day who said, this is the first time I felt valued and felt a sense of dignity in my entire adult or child life in this space. And, what is it about this space that is bringing out that sense of dignity and that sense of wholeness? And I think, I think it is coming from creating the space to actually be able to name the trauma and to be able to fundamentally shift the power dynamics. She said, I've never I've never been able to talk to a CEO openly before about these experiences in my life. And so just, again, flipping the power dynamic and opening the space for those conversations, I think is so fundamental.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we recognize another strong practice in achieving the transformational state that we're seeking is supporting staff to really be able to build and hone the skills to be able to navigate those moments of discomfort in dialogue around issues of race and trauma, and do that deep personal reflection that's necessary to be able to do that well and to interrupt and interrogate what's been created and interrogate our own biases. How are you, Shruti, I'll come to you next if you wouldn't mind, just how are you supporting staff to be able to do that? And what have you seen as some practices that are just working well in doing that?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of this that was talked about in Unrealized Impact as well, about how we need to move beyond some of the kind of icebreaker questions and move into the deeper reflections and the deeper opportunities for discussion and space for connection. So I'd say, I feel like we have to support that at the individual level, in affinity group space, and across affinity groups. And we're doing a lot of work along all three of those levels. So at the end, I'll start with the affinity group space, because it is an area that I think there are a lot of organizations that engage from time to time in this area, and have opportunities that may be even unrealized. So at the affinity group level, first of all, we, like many organizations, had affinity groups of people of color that started before the white affinity groups started. The white affinity group started when we sanctioned it, when we said we need an affinity group for this, for white people at our organization, in addition to the existing affinity groups for various subsets of people of color. I found that the affinity group space for me has been an extraordinary moment to both have a space for shared understanding, and to have which is supportive of healing that we've talked about, but also have a space to push ourselves and really understand where in our affinity areas are we missing the mark? Where are we inadvertently advancing practices that society has set up for us, anti-Black practices, which are prevalent throughout wherever we go? And what would it look like in affinity space for us, and I'll say this as an Asian woman, to advance pro-Black practices. What does that mean? And what does that mean to me as an individual? And what does that mean for us as a group? I'm starting with the affinity space because I do think we do need to get to the individual and across affinity group areas. But the affinity space I have found to be a really empowering method to be able to then say, how do we move across affinity spaces? And it's also been an empowering method to enable deeper reflection for me, myself, and I think for many of my colleagues. So we spend a lot of time on that internally, both in affinity space and working across affinity spaces. And we create spaces that on the across affinity, we have each affinity group creating learning opportunities for all of our organization. So that there is time to really explore things across affinity spaces. So I'd start there as the first lever to really advance this work.
Thank you, Shruti. Alex, how are you supporting staff in your organization?
Yeah, so just building on what Shruti said, I guess the best way for me to put this is that we have help. We hire someone to help us with this, right? I think it would be very easy for me to sit back on my laurels. I'm a Black woman, I'm an immigrant. You heard about all of the ways that I describe myself. And it would be easy for me to say, we got this. And so we could do this work ourselves. We are an organization that is majority people of color. And so again, I think that the setup is there for us to have said, we can do this, right? Like we can build this space. And yet I don't have the hubris, right? To believe that even as I sit in all of those identities, that I have the answer. And so we put in the work. We've been working, some of you know Michelle Molitor, for 5 years or so, and saying like we need to invest in this work, number one, right? I think that a lot of the space has set up a lot of nonprofit organizations to underinvest in this work because there are not a lot of philanthropic dollars are flowing to be able to support this work, but we've prioritized it. And so we are working day in and day out and getting help, external help, to be able to facilitate the affinity groups, to be able to facilitate the conversations that we're having, to be able to train our staff to have the language, to use common language when speaking about trauma, when speaking about pain, when speaking about hurts. And so that's the advice that I would give. And I know obviously Promise 54 does a lot of this work with organizations as well, is don't do it alone. Don't think you can hire your way, solely into it. And I know that this is I'm preaching to the choir here because Promise 54 has said that in so many different spaces, but that you have to put in the work. And you have to invest the resources, both the human capital and the financial resources, to be able to move through some of these difficult stages of both self-awareness as well as organizational awareness.
Thank you, Alex. Duta, when you think more broadly, so not just within your organization, but just more broadly in your sphere, what does resistance to change look like? And how are you overcoming that?
Yeah, I think the resistance to change materializes in what's possible. I myself am someone that gets a lot of energy by focusing on like, what's the path forward? And how do we think about what's possible in terms of test scores, for example? If we know that there have been 2 years without standardized test scores in New Mexico for some of our network schools, as is the case in Colorado and South Dakota, and the system hasn't blown up, then what's possible? And what does it look like to iterate into a space in terms of measuring security and identity, connection to self, others, and the land, the ways in which individuals think about health or wellness, in addition to some of the more satellite data that is test scores or short cycle assessments. And so that's an example that comes to my mind in terms of how resistance shows up. I also think it shows up in terms of one's own connection to purpose and self, that probably materializes in a form of spirituality, belief, or faith. And how you walk in this world matters, and who you are in these spaces, where you're the only one or you're the one of many, matters, and how people see you, and how you represent the radical human that you are, just how we demonstrated this morning. So I think, in addition to the resistance in the form of, like, as I said in my intro, my mother, my cousins, my aunties, my uncles were chaining themselves to a pipeline in Standing Rock 4 years, 5 years ago. It's resistance, and then it sends a message. And how do we think of that holistically in terms of from the way you walk about this world to how you're vigorously and intentionally standing in front of something? I think all of it is a form of resistance.
Absolutely, thank you. Annalisa, I'm curious about what resistance to transformation looks like in your sphere.
So when I think about the different organizations I've been part of, I've seen a spectrum of attempts at transformation, well-intentioned, but there's resistance throughout. And I think about when people say all the things, here's what I believe, everyone's equal, I'm with you, I'll make the hard decisions. And then when you're in the room and the decision needs to be made, you see actually what they do. And that's the resistance, I think, on people who mean well, but actually won't take the hard path, me, myself included. And so an example of that is, I believe families should be partners. Families are equals. We are on the journey of educating children together. Yet when there's an idea to have a family member on the board, actually have families privy to some of these hard conversations about the budget. No, let's not, it's going to take too long. You know, who would we pick? It would just cause commotion. Let's think about that later. Put that in the parking lot. Or if we say, you know, let's invest a lot of money into revamping our history curriculum. Well, that's, I mean, who's done it well? Do we have examples of that? It could be really messy. We already fell when we tried to do this. Like, can't we wait? Just wait longer until we have more proof points. And you need to decide, right? Like, especially when the decision table starts to sway. And then you see a pattern. And soon the words that we said don't match the actions we take. And I say we because I also want to be included in this, that it's not other people, it's us in the decision table. And it takes a lot to stand up and say, no, actually, we're going to interrupt. We're going to go slower. We're not going to spend the money on these other things. We're going to take the hit from whoever, because it's hard to make decisions that are going to be different. But it takes courage. And I would say the willingness to put yourself, sacrifice, and maybe, you know, be out of a job. Like, these are the hard things that I've personally seen, and we need to say it. It's not easy to make these tough decisions and be at the tail end of it.
It's true. And it isn't easy. And we have an audience question about what the day-to-day of that investment looks like. Becky, do you have an anecdote of what this has looked like for you?
Yeah, and we'll hit on the resistance piece too, but I think interestingly, we were talking about the starting point is often in the technical space for organizations. And I believe the resistance also comes disguised in the technical as well. And that if you think about, like, Peter Block talks about the 50 faces of resistance, or Olson's work on detours, I think it shows up so clearly. And I think as leaders, being able to see when that is playing out and not take it at face value, but understand what's actually going on. So concretely thinking about this, what Alex was describing is, this requires investment. And I believe deeply that it requires the investment or co-traveling partner from outside your organization to walk with you and to push and to enlighten and to support. And that costs money. And so when I hear from, leadership team members or board members questioning, why this contract, but are we also questioning the Salesforce contract? Are we questioning the IT infrastructure investments that we're making with the same level of scrutiny? That's a great example of resistance to moving that work forward. And I think that, I think one of the things that I've really taken away from particularly spending time with white co-conspirator leaders in this work is thinking about one of the most powerful things we can do is control the pace of change. And so if that means, naming that resistance head on, or flipping the conversation to ask the question about why we're not examining our IT investments with the same level of scrutiny as our DEI investments, I think that's, a concrete way that we can, at least bring awareness to this and try to shift the dynamic.
Thank you, Becky. I'll put this question to anyone on the panel, because some of the resistance that we experience is in ourselves or in our team members. It's the internalized colonization that we have all adapted to. So how are we as leaders decolonizing our own minds, and how are we supporting our teams to be able to do that?
I'm going to talk to that because that's been my journey of worthiness, to see within myself that I've had this narrative of not being worthy, and how it's played out in burnout and resentment and not being able to sustain, and how I show up, just not loving and kind the way I want to with people I care about, including my family. So seeing that and practicing something that's like the antithesis of, I feel like, what I've been taught, to like put myself first and to make sure I sleep and that I meditate and that I run and that I choose like what makes me happy. These are so hard for me, yet I want to talk about it, and that there's real judgment that comes to it. I'm just like, who's listening? I wonder if they think I'm lazy. And I'm like, I'm not lazy, but unless I start to talk about it and encourage others and hear the words when they ask me about commitment, I'm like, I'm committed. And that means I'm committed to self-care for me, self-care for you, because how can we pour into others when we're empty ourselves? And I know the more I pour into myself, the more I can pour into you, the more we can model for our kids around us that they're worthy of joy. They're worthy of picking things that are fun for the freaking sake of it being fun. Like, can't we like have fun? Can't school be fun? Can't life be fun every day? Like, can't we let loose and just like dance around like that? That would be like the ultimate state, when you could just like know that you look in the mirror and you're like, I'm freaking not just worthy, but I'm awesome. And you're awesome. And because I believe and love myself, I can believe and love you too. So I think that's, for me, the resistance that I try to practice and talk about and be brave to say. And I hope I model for other leaders, and especially my kids and other kids around them, that that's our path. That's what I believe will help transform this movement.
Thank you, Annalisa. Shruti, go ahead, Alex, please.
No, just wanted to just honor Annalisa's words and work in this space, and just want to retweet that. And also just talk about like our journey, right? That and I loved what you said about self-care, but I also love what you're saying about joy. Because we've identified joy as one of our unwritten core values, and joy is a propulsive force, right? It creates unity, it creates community. It lets you find and reclaim your humanity, right? Like joy, it helps you disrupt expectations and helps you disrupt systems, right? It helps you find hope, and we don't often value that. And this work can be so hard. There are days when I do come home depleted, but leaning into the propulsive force and power that is joy for myself and our organization has just been transformational. So I just want to say thank you, Annalisa, for highlighting and bringing joy into the forefront of this work, because I do think that it is one of the necessary components of movement building and transformation.
How are you all factoring in the power of relationships in the transformation you're seeking?
You know, it's an interesting thing. I will say that I worked in a former life. I worked in the corporate world where, and then I joined New Profit after grad school, where, you know, a female-led organization where relationships were at the core of what we do. And it was such a radical shift to move from a corporate stance, which really does embrace so much of I'd say, white supremacy culture and you know, dominant norms, to a world that was relationally centered first. And at every level, you know, interactions between staff, interactions with our funder community, with our portfolio organizations, who we work to stand shoulder to shoulder with, as opposed to have power over. Similar with our funder community, we work to stand shoulder to shoulder with them instead of having them have power over us. So to me, relationships is really, really critical to all of this work, to the DEI work, to healing, and to finding a path forward. And I don't want to ignore, there is an element of this that is the relationship with yourself. And I say self with a capital S. And how are you finding that love and joy and respect of yourself as a core pillar to being able to find love and joy and respect of other people? I think you have to do both, and ignoring one puts the other at peril.
Thank you, Shruti. CEO, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for this conversation and all that you have brought to it, all of your humanity that you have brought to this conversation. We're deeply grateful.
So grateful, so grateful. Thank you so much, Alex and Shruti and Annalisa, Duta, Becky, and Tracy for facilitating. So incredibly generous. I feel inspired and challenged, and just really appreciate y'all being here and sharing your thoughts and perspectives. Folks, a quick couple of reminders as we wrap up today. We have 2 more webinars coming up in our series this month. Tomorrow, we're going to be diving into the concept of governance and how do we liberate governance, thinking about governing boards of our organizations and school boards side by side in 2 different parallel conversations going on tomorrow. And then on Thursday, we'll wrap our series with a conversation around promising practices and get specific with 3 organizational leaders around how those promising practices are playing out in their organizations. So please join us. Feel free to join us. We'd love to have you. And if you're looking for help or support to advance your organizational work, as we've talked about here today, we do have a program called the DEI Accelerator. It's a cohort program, national cohort. We'd love to explore that with you if you think it might be something to help you advance your work organizationally. So feel free to let us know if you need some help or support. And last but not least, if you wouldn't mind taking our last 2 minutes here today, just to give us a little bit of feedback, that would be great. We use that feedback to help inform each and every session. And so that link is in the chat. And I want to close out by thanking Bahara so much. Thank you all for the co-sponsorship and the thinking through how to structure this conversation, and for each and every one of our Bahara fellows that joined us today for this conversation. So powerful. Thank you so much. And we hopefully see y'all tomorrow.
Thank you.